When my husband's birthday dinner started, my seat was gone. I stood at the edge of the long restaurant table, blinking at the row of smiling faces and clinking glasses. There was laughter, the sound of silverware on porcelain, the faint hum of jazz from the overhead speakers. But in front of me, where a chair should have been, there was nothing. Just an empty space tucked between his mother and one of his coworkers. My mother-in-law tilted her glass and said almost sweetly, "We didn't think you'd mind. It's a small thing." Her tone carried that silky edge only she could polish, like sugar wrapped around glass shards. My husband looked down at his plate, busying himself with his napkin, as though the folds of white linen had suddenly become the most complicated puzzle in the world. He didn't speak. He didn't pull out a chair for me. He didn't even look at me. A chill ran through my arms despite the warmth of the crowded room. I felt eyes flick toward me, then quickly away, the way people glance at a dropped tray in a restaurant but pretend it never happened. For a second, I thought maybe someone was playing a prank, that a waiter would appear with an extra chair and laugh off the mix-up, but no chair came. No one moved. I smiled, tight and thin. Then I picked up my bag, nodded once, and turned. The room dimmed around the edges of my vision as I walked away, heels clicking against polished floorboards. No one followed. Behind me, the chatter dipped into a momentary silence, like someone had turned the volume knob down just enough for the absence to be noticed. Then it rose again, covering over the hollow where I should have been. That was the moment everything shifted. But let me take you back. Earlier that afternoon, I had stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the fabric of the dress I had chosen carefully for this dinner. It wasn't too loud, not too simple. A soft navy blue, elegant without trying too hard. I had curled my hair, dabbed on perfume that smelled faintly of citrus and clean linen, and slipped the wrapped gift into my purse. I imagined placing it beside the cake, handing it to him with a smile while everyone looked on. I imagined feeling part of something, included, wanted. The restaurant reservation had been made weeks ago. His mother insisted on arranging it, of course. "Don't worry about the details, dear. Just show up," she said in that tone that made obedience sound like gratitude. I didn't protest. I wanted harmony more than I wanted control. In the car on the way there, I tried to push away the unease that had been simmering all day. It was the same unease I had felt at Christmas, when she pointed me to the folding chair near the kids' table. The same unease I felt at Thanksgiving when my name card was missing, and she waved her hand, saying, "Just sit anywhere, it's fine." Always small cuts, never deep enough to make anyone else notice, but sharp enough to keep me bleeding inside. Still, I told myself this time would be different. It was his birthday after all. Surely no one would spoil that. The restaurant itself was beautiful, glowing with soft amber light. The air smelled of garlic butter and fresh bread. Waiters in crisp white shirts glided between tables with trays balanced high. A birthday dinner should have felt warm, celebratory, safe. Instead, from the moment I stepped in, I felt like an intruder in my own life. The table was long and already crowded when I arrived. His coworkers were laughing loudly at one end. His sister was snapping photos of the appetizer spread. His mother was seated right next to him, leaning close, whispering something that made him smile faintly. And then there was that empty gap where my seat should have been. I remember pausing, scanning for a chair that might have been pushed aside, perhaps tucked against the wall, but there was none. Every place was filled, every glass already poured, every napkin neatly folded in someone else's lap. For a heartbeat, I hesitated. Maybe I could pull up a chair from another table, squeeze myself in, force myself into the picture. But I knew better. I had learned the hard way that when you squeeze yourself into a space where you're not wanted, you only end up looking like the problem. So I stood there, holding my bag a little tighter, and listened as his mother's words cut the last thread of pretense. "We didn't think you'd mind." Those words landed like ice water down my spine. Not an accident. Not an oversight. A decision. Deliberate, dressed up as kindness, handed to me like a poisoned gift. In that split second, memories stacked on top of each other, heavy and suffocating. The Christmas folding chair, the missing name card, the family reunion photo where I was cropped halfway out of the frame, the whispered jokes that stopped when I entered a room. All the moments I had swallowed and smiled through, convincing myself they were harmless. But this wasn't harmless. This was public. This was erasure, carried out in front of every person who mattered to him, and he said nothing. I forced a smile, the kind that burns your cheeks because it is glued on with sheer willpower. I adjusted the strap of my bag, straightened my shoulders, and turned. Walking out was the easiest and hardest thing I had ever done. Easy because my body moved almost on its own, like it had been waiting years for this moment. Hard because every step felt like shedding another illusion, another hope that someday I would belong. Behind me, I caught the faint hitch in the laughter, the silence that rushed in for a second before conversation resumed. Maybe they thought I was being dramatic. Maybe they thought I'd come back after cooling off in the restroom. Maybe they didn't think of me at all. But as the door closed softly behind me and the cool night air hit my skin, I realized something. I didn't need to sit at their table to prove I mattered. The night had only just begun, and so had I. I did not drive home right away. The air outside the restaurant was sharp with the scent of rain and city traffic. For a moment I stood under the awning, clutching my bag, listening to the laughter muffled through glass walls behind me. It felt like the world had split in two. On one side was the table where my chair had been erased. On the other was the street, wide open and waiting for me to choose my next step. I chose distance. The parking lot was crowded, headlights sliding across the pavement like restless eyes. I walked slowly, my heels clicking louder than I wanted them to. Each step felt heavy, but it also felt like claiming ground I had been denied inside. My car was parked under a flickering light. I slid in, shut the door, and sat in silence. For a long time I didn't start the engine. I just gripped the steering wheel and let my breath come fast, then slow, then steady again. My phone buzzed once, twice. His name on the screen. I let it ring until it stopped. I thought about going home, but the idea of walking into that quiet house, waiting for him to return with the echo of that dinner clinging to his clothes, felt unbearable. Instead, I turned the key and drove. No plan, no destination, just the road stretching out like a blank page. The city blurred past, neon signs and wet pavement reflecting red and gold. My mind kept circling the same image, that empty space at the table, the way his mother's smile had curled like smoke, the way he had chosen silence over me. It was not just the missing chair. It was the confirmation of every small dismissal I had endured for years. I pulled into a late-night diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where truckers sip coffee and students huddle over textbooks. The fluorescent lights were harsh, but the booth I chose felt like shelter. I ordered coffee I did not need, opened my bag, and pulled out the small gift I had wrapped so carefully. It was a watch. Not expensive, but thoughtful. I had chosen it because of a story he once told me about losing track of time during long meetings. I imagined him opening it at dinner, maybe smiling at the engraving I had asked the jeweler to carve. Always with you. The word stared back at me now like a cruel joke. I set the box on the table and just looked at it. My reflection in the chrome napkin holder looked tired, eyes smudged with more than makeup. The waitress came by, poured more coffee, and asked if I wanted pie. I almost laughed. Pie felt absurd when my marriage was unraveling in slow motion, but I nodded anyway. Apple pie, warm, with ice cream melting fast. Sometimes sweetness is the only anchor. My phone buzzed again. This time a text. "Where did you go?" I stared at the words, thumb hovering. Then another message. "Come back, we can talk." No apology, no recognition of what had just happened. Just a command, disguised as concern. I locked the screen and slid the phone face down. Memories came rushing in, uninvited. The rehearsal dinner before our wedding, when his mother rearranged the seating chart, so I was at the far end of the table. The holiday morning, when she handed me a gift bag filled with kitchen sponges, while everyone else unwrapped jewelry and books. The family photo where she positioned herself beside him, leaving me to hover at the edge. Each time I told myself it didn't matter, that I could endure it for the sake of peace. But peace never came. Only smaller and smaller spaces for me to occupy until finally, at his birthday dinner, my space vanished altogether. The pie was gone, the coffee cold, when I realized I could not sit in that booth forever. I needed clarity, not caffeine. I needed to decide what came next. I drove to the lake on the edge of town, a place I used to visit before we married. The parking lot was empty, the water black and still under the moonlight. I sat on a bench and let the night air sting my cheeks. It smelled of damp earth and pine. I pulled out my phone again, but not to answer him. Instead, I opened the folder I had been keeping quietly for months. Screenshots of texts, recordings of conversations, notes from nights when words cut deeper than silence. I had started collecting them, without admitting to myself why. Maybe part of me knew this moment would come. One photo in that folder caught my eye. It was from Thanksgiving, just a few months earlier. I had been serving pie when his mother leaned across the table and said loudly, "You're just here for the food anyway." Everyone laughed. Even him. I had smiled, but later in the car I cried quietly against the window. I had snapped a photo of the table that night, not for the food but for the reminder, proof that I had not imagined it. Now, sitting by the lake, I looked at that photo again and felt something shift. It was not despair this time. It was resolve. The phone buzzed once more. Another message. "You embarrassed me. Come back and fix this." The words hardened something inside me. Embarrassed him. As though my absence had been more humiliating than my erasure. I stood, tucked the gift box deeper into my bag, and took one last look at the still water. My reflection rippled, then disappeared with the breeze. That was the truth. In their eyes, I had never been solid enough to hold my own seat, but I could choose to be solid for myself. When I finally drove home, the house was dark. His car was not there. I slipped inside quietly, set the watch on the kitchen counter, and poured myself a glass of water. The silence was thick, but it was mine. I did not know yet what tomorrow would bring. Confrontation, perhaps. More silence, more blame. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, I felt steady. I had walked out of that restaurant not because I was weak, but because I was done pretending. And that was only the beginning. The next morning, sunlight crept through the blinds, harsh and uninvited. My eyes felt swollen from lack of sleep. I had replayed the dinner scene again and again, searching for a detail that might make it less deliberate, less cruel. But every angle, every memory, landed on the same truth. The missing chair had been planned. My absence was not an accident, it was an arrangement. The house was quiet. His shoes were still at the door, his jacket thrown over the couch. He must have come home late, long after I had slipped into bed pretending to be asleep. I moved slowly, pouring coffee, listening for signs of him stirring. My chest tightened with the weight of words I knew we would have to exchange. By the time he walked into the kitchen, I had already rehearsed 3 different conversations in my head. One where I begged for recognition, one where I demanded answers, and one where I said nothing at all. He looked at me, then at the untouched watch box on the counter. His face was unreadable. "You left," he said finally. His voice was flat, not angry, not tender, just an observation wrapped in quiet accusation. "I had no seat," I replied. My words sounded colder than I intended, but the truth was sharp, and I could not soften it anymore. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling hard. "You made a scene. People were asking where you went." I set down my cup. The sound echoed louder than it should have. I didn't make a scene. I removed myself from one. For a long moment, silence filled the room. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, the faint traffic outside, all of it felt louder than us. He leaned against the counter, eyes fixed on the floor. "She just wanted it to be perfect," he said at last, almost to himself. I laughed without meaning to. The sound was bitter, not amused. "Perfect for who?" "Because it wasn't for me." He flinched, as if the words landed harder than expected. But he did not answer. Instead, he picked up the watch box, turned it in his hands, then set it back down. He left the kitchen without another word. The door to his office clicked shut. I stood there, shaking, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. Rage and sadness tangled inside me, a knot I could not undo. I wanted him to defend me, to see me, to pull me into that chair himself, but he had chosen silence again. Silence in front of them. Silence now, in our own home. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder of evidence I had been collecting. The screenshots of past messages, the photos of place cards missing my name, the recordings of dismissive remarks. It looked like a case file more than a marriage. I scrolled slowly, each image pressing deeper into my chest. One video caught my eye. It was from a summer barbecue 2 years ago. His mother had laughed loudly, announcing to everyone that I burnt the burgers on purpose to get out of kitchen duty. The crowd laughed, including him. I had recorded it absent-mindedly, just to capture the kids playing in the yard, but the audio had picked up every cruel word. Watching it now made my skin crawl. I saved it into a new folder titled For Later. I didn't know exactly why. Maybe for my lawyer, maybe for my own sanity, maybe because part of me needed proof that I was not imagining the years of being erased. The day passed slowly. He stayed in his office. I cleaned a little, folded laundry, tried to distract myself with meaningless tasks, but the tension hung heavy in every corner. At dinner, I set the table for one, sat in silence, and ate slowly. He did not join me. That night, lying in bed, I thought of the lake, the stillness of the water, the way my reflection had vanished with the breeze. I realized that was how I felt in this marriage. Present, but never solid. Always one small gust away from disappearing. My phone buzzed around midnight. A message from his sister. "Why did you ruin the dinner?" Mom was devastated. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. My thumb hovered, but I didn't respond. Instead, I turned off the phone and placed it face down. The next morning, I made a decision. I would not let their version of events become the only one. If they wanted to paint me as dramatic, selfish, or ungrateful, I would answer with facts. I started small. I wrote down every incident I could remember. The cropped family photo, the Thanksgiving insult, the missing chair at Christmas, the sponges in the gift bag. I wrote dates, locations, who was there, what was said. The list grew faster than I expected, stretching across pages. It was not just a diary, it was a record, a map of erasure. When he finally emerged from his office, eyes tired, I was still writing. He paused in the doorway, frowning at the papers spread across the table. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Remembering," I said. My voice was steady. His mouth opened as if to argue, then closed again. He left without pressing further. That silence told me more than words ever could. By evening, I had a folder thick with proof. It did not erase the pain, but it gave me something solid to hold on to, something that reminded me I was not invisible, even if they wanted me to be. That night, I stood at the window, watching headlights drift down the street. My reflection stared back at me, faint but undeniable. I whispered to it, "You are here. You matter." And for the first time in years, I believed myself. What I did not know yet was that the next step would not be mine alone. Someone else was already talking. Someone else had seen enough. And soon, the truth would spread further than I ever imagined. 2 days passed before the inevitable knock on the door. I knew it would come. I had felt it building in the silence of unanswered calls, in the buzzing of group chats I refused to open, in the way his shoulders stiffened every time his phone lit up. When I heard the sharp rap of knuckles on wood, my stomach tightened. He opened the door before I could stop him. His mother stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Her perfume hit me first, sharp and floral, filling the room with a sweetness that felt suffocating. Behind her, his sister followed, arms crossed, eyes narrowed like a judge already convinced of my guilt. She smiled at him, not me. "We need to talk," she said, as if she owned the air we breathed. I stayed at the kitchen table, my papers and notes spread in front of me. I didn't move to clear them. I wanted her to see. She glanced down at the pages, her smile tightening. "You embarrassed the family," she began. Her voice carried that familiar mixture of pity and poison. "At your husband's own birthday dinner, do you know how it looked when you stormed out like that?" I folded my hands calmly. It looked exactly how it was. There was no seat for me. She waved a manicured hand, dismissive. "It was a mistake, a mix-up. You made it bigger than it was." I leaned forward slightly. "A mistake is forgetting to order an extra dessert. A mistake is misplacing a coat. Removing my chair, then telling me not to mind, was not a mistake. It was intentional." His sister scoffed, muttering something under her breath. His mother's smile did not falter, but her eyes sharpened. "You are too sensitive. Always twisting things. We were trying to make the evening special, and you ruined it." I felt my pulse quicken, but my voice stayed even. Special for who? Because it was not for me. It never is. He shifted uncomfortably in the doorway. His silence screamed louder than words. She placed her bag on the counter, the gesture firm, like she was settling in for battle. We've welcomed you into this family. We've given you everything. And this is how you repay us? With drama? The laugh slipped from my lips before I could stop it. It wasn't amusement. It was disbelief, sharp and bitter. Welcomed me? You've spent years reminding me I don't belong. Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthdays, reunions. Every time, there's a new way to push me aside. Last week, you did not even leave me a place to sit. Her face tightened, the mask cracking for just a second. You exaggerate. People were watching, and you embarrassed him. Do you care about his reputation at all? I stood now, slowly, deliberately. The chair legs scraped against the floor. What I care about is respect. I care about not being erased in front of strangers. If his reputation depends on me swallowing humiliation, then maybe the problem isn't me. Her eyes flashed. Watch your tone, she hissed. I met her gazes steadily. No, watch yours. The silence that followed was thick. His sister's jaw dropped slightly, unprepared for defiance. He shifted again, finally speaking. His voice was low, uncertain. Mom, maybe we should let it go. Her head snapped toward him, sharp enough to make him flinch. Let it go? She walked out of your dinner. She left you there. People were whispering. Do you know how hard I worked to plan that night? I stepped closer, my hands trembling but steady enough to hold my ground. You worked hard to plan everything except a place for me. That was not oversight. That was intention. And you know it. Her lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time, she did not have a quick retort. I took a breath, my voice quieter but stronger. I have proof. Every comment, every slight, every moment where I was pushed aside. You can deny it, but I have it all. If you want to play this game in front of others, we can. I am ready. His mother blinked, her composure faltering. His sister shifted uncomfortably, her arms dropping to her sides. You would not dare, she whispered. I already have, I answered. The room seemed to tilt in that moment. Her authority, so carefully woven, began to fray. She looked at her son, expecting him to defend her, but he said nothing. His silence no longer served her. It betrayed her. She grabbed her bag, the snap of the clasp loud in the stillness. This is not over, she spat, her voice low, trembling with rage. Maybe it is, I replied softly. She turned, storming toward the door. His sister trailed after, shooting me a glare sharp enough to cut, but it slid off me like water. The door slammed shut, rattling the frame. I stood there, breathing hard, my hands shaking, but my chest lighter than it had been in years. For once, I had not swallowed the words. For once, I had spoken them. He leaned against the counter, rubbing his temples. You shouldn't have pushed her like that, he muttered. I turned to him, my voice calm. I didn't push. I stood. There's a difference. He looked at me, eyes tired, conflicted. She won't forget this. Neither will I said. We stood in silence, two people in the same room, but worlds apart. I gathered my papers into a neat stack, slid them into a folder, and placed it carefully on the counter. It felt like drawing a line. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, but the echoes of the confrontation still rang in my ears. For the first time, I did not feel small. I did not feel erased. I felt present. Solid. What I did not know was that the ripples from that confrontation were already spreading. Words spoken in anger would not stay contained within these walls. They would reach further, carrying consequences none of us could escape. And I was ready for whatever came next. The phone calls began the next morning. At first, it was just his sister, leaving a voicemail laced with contempt. You should be ashamed. Mom cried all night. Do you realize what you've done to this family? Her words bled with accusation, each syllable meant to cut. I deleted the message without listening to the end. Then came his aunt, her voice softer but no less sharp. Families have disagreements, but you crossed the line. A wife doesn't humiliate her husband like that. I wondered what they would say if they had stood in my shoes, looking at an empty space where a seat should have been. I wondered if they would call that humiliation, too. By midday, my phone was buzzing so constantly that I silenced it and left it face down on the counter. Each vibration felt like a reminder that the confrontation had escaped the walls of our kitchen. It was now being dissected in living rooms and group chats, passed along like gossip dressed up as concern. He came home from work late that evening, shoulders slumped, eyes heavy. He set his keys down with a sigh and looked at me across the room. "They won't stop calling me," he said. "Everyone wants to know what's going on." I met his gaze. "Maybe you should tell them the truth." His jaw tightened. "The truth is complicated." "No," I said, my voice steady. "The truth is simple. There was no chair for me. That's not complicated." He shook his head, pacing slowly. "You don't understand how it looks. To them, it seems like you're trying to tear us apart." I let out a sharp laugh. "They tore me out long ago. I just stopped pretending not to notice." He stopped pacing, staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. There was weariness in his eyes, but also something else. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. The following weekend, we were invited to his cousin's engagement party. I hesitated when the invitation arrived, the embossed card shining with the promise of celebration. Part of me wanted to decline immediately, to avoid another staged humiliation. But another part of me was curious, almost defiant. If they wanted me erased, they would have to do it in plain sight. I went. The venue was a decorated hall, glowing with fairy lights and filled with music. Laughter echoed across the space. I walked in by his side, my dress simple but chosen carefully, my chin lifted. Eyes turned toward us. Some smiled, others whispered. I could feel the tension ripple through the room like static. His mother was already there, radiant in her sequined gown, surrounded by relatives. She saw me, and her smile froze for a fraction of a second before returning. It was enough, I noticed. The evening moved in slow waves. Conversations hummed, glasses clinked, photos were taken. I stayed quiet, polite, present, but I could feel the weight of scrutiny pressing against me. People were waiting, watching, hoping for a crack. It came when the toasts began. His cousin raised her glass, thanking everyone for coming. Then his mother stepped forward, her voice clear and practiced. "Family," she said, "is about unity, about standing together through everything. No one should ever put themselves above that." The words were not directed at me by name, but every eye turned in my direction. The implication was sharp enough to draw blood. I felt heat rise in my chest, but I stayed still. I lifted my own glass, smiling faintly, and said just loud enough, "Unity is impossible when some are left without a place at the table." A murmur rippled through the room. Some gasped. Others shifted uncomfortably. His mother's eyes narrowed, but she did not respond. The silence that followed spoke louder than any rebuttal. Afterward, he pulled me aside, his voice tight with anger. "Why did you say that? Couldn't you just let it go for one night?" I looked at him, my voice low but steady. "I've let it go for years. That's why they think they can keep doing it." He pressed his hands to his face, groaning softly. "You don't know what you've started." But I did. And for once, I was not afraid of it. The days that followed were heavy with fallout. Friends of the family called, some sympathetic, others hostile. A few told me quietly that they had noticed the way I was treated, that they admired my courage for speaking up. Their voices were rare, but they mattered. They reminded me I was not crazy, not overreacting, not alone. Still, the majority stood behind her. My mother-in-law had decades of influence, a carefully polished reputation. She knew how to paint herself as the victim, how to twist stories until she stood glowing at the center while others dimmed around her. I had seen it before, but now I was living it. One evening, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You are tearing this family apart. Leave before you destroy him completely." No signature, but I did not need one. I placed the letter in the same folder as the screenshots, the recordings, the notes. My file was growing, thick and undeniable. Each piece of paper was another reminder that I was not imagining this, that the gaslight flickering around me was real, not in my head. That night, I sat across from him at the kitchen table. He looked worn, tired of being pulled between two worlds. I slid the folder toward him. "Read it," I said. He hesitated, then opened it. Page after page, his eyes moved, his brow furrowing deeper. The barbecue video, the Thanksgiving photo, the transcript of his mother's remarks, the cruel text messages. He flipped through them slowly, then stopped, his hands trembling slightly. When he looked up, there was no anger, only something like recognition. Maybe shame, maybe grief. "I didn't know it was this much," he whispered. I leaned back, my voice quiet. "You knew enough. You just chose not to see." He closed the folder gently, as though it might burn him. For the first time, I saw cracks in the armor of denial he had worn for so long. But whether those cracks would grow into change, or seal themselves shut again, I could not tell. All I knew was that the truth was now on the table. And once truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. The ripple had become a wave. And soon, it would crash. The folder sat between us like a living thing. He touched it again that night, hesitated, then finally said, "I need time." His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, as if saying it any louder might shatter something fragile. I nodded. Time was something I had already given for years. What I needed now was truth. The following week was a blur of strained silence. We moved around each other like ghosts in the same house. Meals were eaten separately. Conversations were clipped, almost mechanical. And still, the phone calls kept coming. His mother, his sister, his aunt. Each one a chorus of blame and indignation. He answered sometimes, but his replies grew shorter. I could hear the fatigue in his voice. One night, he came into the living room, where I sat with a book I wasn't really reading. His eyes were red, his expression heavy. "They think I've chosen you over them," he said. I looked up slowly. "Have you?" The silence that followed was its own answer. The next morning, I made a decision. I booked an appointment at a salon across town, not for vanity, but for something symbolic. I needed to see myself differently, to reclaim something small but powerful. The stylist greeted me with warmth, running her fingers gently through my hair as I explained what I wanted. A fresh cut, a new style, something lighter, freer. As the scissors snipped and strands fell to the floor, I felt a weight lift. The mirror reflected not just shorter hair, but a woman who had stopped waiting for permission to exist. When I left the salon, the sun was brighter, the air sharper, the city louder in the best way. I walked with my head high, the breeze catching the edges of my new look. For the first time in a long time, I caught my reflection in a shop window and smiled without forcing it. At home, he noticed immediately. "You changed your hair," he said, almost cautiously. "Yes," I answered. "I needed to." He nodded slowly, as if realizing it meant more than he could put into words. 2 days later, the confrontation came again. This time, not at my door, but at his office. His mother had shown up uninvited, demanding to see him. Coworkers whispered, glancing through the glass walls of the lobby. By the time he came home, he looked defeated. "She says you've turned me against her," he muttered. I met his eyes. "Or maybe she finally sees that she can't control me anymore." He said nothing, but I could tell the cracks in his loyalty to her were widening. The breaking point came the following weekend. His family hosted a gathering, smaller than before, but still filled with chatter and tension. He asked if I wanted to go. I paused, then said yes. Not because I expected acceptance, but because I refused to vanish. When we arrived, eyes followed me as always. Whispers circled like smoke, but this time, I walked taller, shoulders back, hair shining under the lights. I took a seat at the table before anyone could suggest otherwise. His mother entered moments later, her face composed but her eyes sharp. She glanced at me, then at her son. Something unspoken passed between them. She opened her mouth, perhaps to deliver another carefully crafted insult, but he spoke first. "Mom, enough." His voice was calm but firm, stronger than I had ever heard in her presence. "She is my wife. She belongs at this table. If you can't respect that, then maybe we shouldn't come anymore." The room froze. For the first time, silence worked in my favor. His mother's face paled, her lips parting as if she couldn't comprehend defiance coming from him. She sputtered something about misunderstanding, about family unity, but her words landed weakly. I sat still, heart pounding, but my hands steady on the tablecloth. For once, I did not need to defend myself. He had spoken, The shift was small but seismic. The evening carried on awkwardly after that, conversations forced, laughter brittle. But the message had been delivered. The power she had wielded for so long had been cracked open in front of everyone. When we left, the night air felt different, lighter. In the car, he gripped the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the road. "I should have said it sooner," he admitted. I turned to him, my voice soft but certain. "You should have, but you said it now." The days that followed were quieter. Fewer calls, fewer confrontations. His mother retreated into silence, perhaps plotting, perhaps licking wounds. I didn't care. For the first time, I felt like I had carved a place for myself, not because they gave it, but because I took it. The folder of evidence remained in the drawer, a reminder of how far things had gone. I did not look at it often, but knowing it was there gave me strength, proof that my reality was real, that I had not imagined the years of dismissal. One evening, sitting together on the porch, he asked, "Do you think things will ever be normal again?" I sipped my tea, watching the sky shift to twilight. "Maybe not normal," I said, "but maybe honest." Honesty, after all, was more than I had ever been given in that family. Weeks passed. The sting of that birthday dinner lingered, but it no longer defined me. My reflection in the mirror looked stronger. My footsteps felt firmer. The silence between us slowly filled with tentative words, small gestures, cautious rebuilding. Whether our marriage would survive, I did not know. But I knew this. I would never again stand quietly at the edge of a table waiting for a chair that never came. I had learned that sometimes the only way to be seen is to walk away, even if it means walking into the unknown. And perhaps that was the lesson all along. So, I leave you with this question. If someone erased your place at the table, would you fight for it? Or would you walk out and build your own?